All right, this is Roger Bianchini in the Royal Examiner Studio with former County Administrator Doug Stanley. Doug, thanks for consenting to do a video interview with us.
I'd always promised you over the years, Roger, that I'd sit down with you at some point, so I guess I'm out of excuses now, right?
Right, and I had to write down in my notes for the interview in all caps, former, to remind me that you are no longer the County Administrator. And that's why you're here today, at least in part, is to give us a perspective on your career here, which has essentially been your entire career, quarter of a century with the county.
Half a life.
Half a lifetime, quarter century with the county, and 20 years, the only county administrator this community had had this century up until August 1st. So give us a little perspective on that time here, the quarter agreement, the community trying to recover from the loss of its biggest employer since World War II. Just, you've had a largely successful tenure here. There were times when the county and the EDA were functioning remarkably well. Didn't end that way. Mm-hmm. But just give us an overview of how the community developed economically.
Well, as you know, I came here in 1994, December of 94, as the county's first full-time zoning administrator. Became planning director in April of 96. And beginning on April 1st, April Fool's Day of 2000, became interim county administrator, replacing Ed Duncan, who had been let go by the Board of Supervisors at that time. I think I became permanent in September of 2000, and I'd like to tell a story about 3 or 4 times a week when he finished his bus run. Stuart Rudisill, who was chair of the board, would come in to see me and ask me if I put my application in yet. Stuart,
I was going to ask you because it was rattling around in the back of my head that Stuart had something to do.
It was Stuart and John Vance were the two that hounded me pretty hard to put my application in. In part, honestly, I saw both Ron George, who was county's second county administrator and served for about 18 years. He was let go and ended up resigning, but in 1996. And then with Ed, and it was a little hesitant at the time for me, obviously taking the step up from a department head level to one that works at the, obviously at the will and discretion of the Board of Supervisors. It's a different step. It's more political.
And what was your experience level when you came here as zoning administrator?
So I had during grad school and undergrad, I had served in a part-time capacity in Spotsylvania County, so I had background. I have a undergrad in geography from Mary Washington and a master's in urban and regional planning from Virginia Commonwealth University, and I worked in Spotsylvania.
Go Rams.
Go Rams. Spotsylvania, one of the fastest growing counties at the time, so I got a lot of good experience, hands-on experience. Meeting 200 and 300 person rezoning meetings, so I got a lot of good hands-on experience of especially the land use side of it when I came here. As you know, mid-90s, the county had just gone through 93, 94, a strategic planning process to take a look at the community and the aftermath of the closing of Avtex in 1989. And the emphasis at the time was we need to replace the lost jobs and investment. Avtex, I believe, at one point paid over half of the taxes in the community, and obviously the largest employer in the community. And
between corporate taxes and the taxes all their employees paid.
Absolutely. Stephen Hevner had just been brought on, I think a month or two before me, maybe a little October or so of that year.
Former EDA executive director.
Former EDA executive director, with kind of the impetus was, hey, we need to market this community. And so Stephen was on the marketing side. Obviously on the planning side, it's our job to work with the prospective industries to help recruit them and bring them into the community and get them permitted and under construction and completed. So, I think you have to look at the fact that we as a community were very successful from about the mid-90s started with Torrey Plastics. That was the first big project this community had. You had the Pentab facility as well. But then a string of successes in 90.
Then DuPont was first, right?
DuPont was back in the 70s. That was kind of pre-Avtex.
Right.
But you had Family Dollar in about 96.
Well, not pre-Avtex collapse.
Pre-Avtex collapse. Family Dollar, ultimately Ferguson Enterprises, their warehouse facility, and then Cisco in 2004, 2005. In between there, you had the Bearing Truck facility, which never got completely off the ground. They got the building built, but later we were able to recruit Interbank to that facility. So, over the 20-year period from 1995, the community was able to recruit over 2,500 jobs and over $500 million in investment to help replace what we lost with Avtex. So.
Now, are those the things strictly that you've just mentioned, or does that include the commercial development later that came around the Walmart and Target shopping center?
That's separate, and certainly, and the EDA was not as involved in those projects. Those commercial developers, they're usually private deals, and they do the homework and come in. They're not looking for incentives and those things. But we worked specifically with not only the folks at Riverton Commons, but also across the street at Crooked Run to recruit those folks into the community. And if you remember, Roger, you went shopping, you went to Kmart. Most of us, you had to go down the road to Walmart or Target once or every week or two to go shopping for stuff you didn't necessarily want to get here or couldn't get here. So,
to which communities were they located closest then?
You're talking about like Walmart, Winchester. Most of us, you drove to Winchester.
Yeah.
That was your shopping, dining experience to go out. And a lot of folks in the community bemoaned the fact that you didn't have choice here locally. And
there was some in the town.
Some in the town,
the county,
nothing in the
county
county.
was
Nothing.
really lacking.
Yeah, nothing. And I think if you go back to the 1975, the county's first comp plan, it identified the Route 345-22 corridor for future commercial development. And nothing happened. Part of that was you didn't have water and sewer available to facilitate that development. And, we had a new board come on in 1996, and, you had to make that decision. Do you want to work with the town and try to facilitate that, or do you want to get in the water and sewer business? And ultimately the decision was made to work with the town and try to facilitate that development. And ultimately it happened, and then we had to amend the corridor agreement. But
and you have directed yourself into what my next notes were about the development of the corridor agreement and that commercial base that was developed, because that process has sort of over the years had its ups and downs, but really it ultimately allowed that development.
It allowed that development, and at the end of the day, the town, with getting a 30% stake in the meals tax and a 5% of the lodging tax, they were able to recoup some additional funding as well. They also benefit in the fact that additional, the county has identified and directed all the meals tax money goes towards school capital facilities, so that really has facilitated that. And I would want to add that when all that growth happened in the corridor with the warehousing and distribution facilities, we started earmarking the real estate machinery and tools tax from those projects towards school capital improvements as well. So when you look at this community and the fact that what we've been able to accomplish over the last 20 years, we didn't have to, luckily, because we wouldn't have been able to do it, we didn't have to raise taxes as much because we grew the that's right. We grew the tax base by bringing in industry and business, which allowed for us to.
And that really was at the base of the county supervisors agreeing to capital improvements, particularly with the schools,
because we had a revenue source.
There was a commercial tax base to support it. We weren't going to have to raise the tax base up so much on the citizens.
Absolutely, and again, you had all the industrial growth in the late 90s, early 2000s, but then starting about 2004 or 5, that's when you had the shopping centers coming on. And again, we opened those 2 new high schools in 2007. We were able to dedicate a lot of that revenue towards paying the debt service for those facilities.
It was 2007 when those corridor shopping things really started to come into.
Yeah. The timing worked out pretty well from that standpoint.
The end of your tenure here may not have gone exactly as you'd planned, but I think you've beaten the odds as a municipal manager being in that position for 20 years, because I know the last time I researched it, the average lifespan of a municipal manager is 4.5 years. And I think that's because, as you can see, it can be a highly politicized position that catches the focus for not only the good things that go on in the community, but the bad.
I think out of the 95 counties in Virginia, I was probably maybe the 5th longest tenured across the state, somewhere close to that
Right.
number. When Dave Ash retired this past year in Clark, I made in the region, I was the longest tenured. You're probably right on probably 4, 5, 6 years is probably close to the average. I think the last time I counted up, I'd worked with 11 town managers, I think including Matt here at the end, over the years. And
Matt, who may have been on the supervisors when you came.
he was on the board in '96. So I was here maybe a year and a half before Matt came on the board.
Right. And I told you, you want to focus on the career and the things we've been talking about, but I did want to ask you if there's any perspective or regrets on how the EDA situation evolved over the last few years. Talk about as much as you can legally, but just in general, well, maybe before we get to that, a little bit about the county staff you've worked with here.
First of
over the years.
all,
because not only have you just left, but Bob Childress, the deputy county administrator who has years of background with VDOT, has announced his retirement, coming up in a month, I think, or so.
Correct, into August.
And that's a lot of institutional knowledge the county's losing all at the same time.
They're going to miss Bob a lot more than they probably miss me. No, Bob had worked for 20 couple years with VDOT prior to coming with the county on July 1 of 2010.
And he does a lot of the nuts and bolts work in the sanitary district.
He does, and obviously what stood out for Bob, we knew it in advance that we were taking over Shendo Farms in July 1 of 2010, and I had worked with Bob for a number of years. He was the assistant residency administrator with VDOT, Dowd and Luray, and covered.
I hate to admit it, but I think I can remember that.
He covered Page, Warren, and Clark counties, and then they closed the residency down there, and that's I'd started talking to Bob, and I knew Dick was going to be retiring, Dick Magnifico, who I worked with. Bob's been great. He really understands construction, road maintenance, including snow removal, and it was a real opportune time for us when we brought him on board. So he's going to be greatly missed, but he's got.
I think Ralph Rinaldi, who's on the school board now, but his work as part of the Farms Property Owners Association, talked about how much they were going to miss him.
We've probably done, I don't know the exact number, over 20 rural addition projects, and most of them we've been able to save a lot of money because Bob actually will do the administration of the construction projects. That saves money. As far as other staff, I certainly will miss all of the staff that I've worked with over the years, both ones that have already left and some that left, like Carolyn, and yet stayed around. She was.
I told her she's working more in her retirement than she did before.
Probably not far off it. She was finance director, and she came on with the county in 2000, right before I became county administrator. We spent 15 years together with her as finance director. A lot of Jody's first week with the county as a receptionist was my first week as county administrator. And she's one of those that has grown along with the county, given professional opportunities. And she moved from receptionist to the county attorney secretary and then later to HR. And she's one of those kind of stars that has shined within the organization. Taryn Logan. Taryn started right out of James Madison with a degree in public administration. I think she was a planner 1, planner 2, a deputy planning director, and then became planning director.
In fact, was she the one that was hired that allowed you not to be doing double duty as
county
administrator?
So she came on in 2001, and over the course of about 7 years, she got to the point where I knew she could handle it. So she became planning director July 1 of 2008. So I did double duty for about 8 years.
Wow, yeah.
And then
I didn't realize it was that long.
Yep. And people like Mike Berry, Brandy Rosser, Andre Fletcher, all folks that started. David Beam. David started as a part-time building inspector, started internally and grew to a department head position. And I'm proud of all those folks, personally and professionally, for their dedication and hard work to serve the citizens of our community.
And I think there was a show of some staff support at the separation agreement special meeting. There were a number of county staff in the back. I think one even had a sign, "I like Doug Stanley," or "I support Doug Stanley." And really, that was the only thing on the agenda. They had nothing from their departments on that agenda. Did you, I guess that caught your eye?
Yeah, I appreciate staff, their hard work and dedication, not only me to the county, but we're a team, and we work very good together. And the reality is that the county administrator or town manager positions are, you serve at the pleasure and at the will of the Board of Supervisors. And sometimes a change is perceived to be necessary and happens. And I was I was a staff member twice when that happened with Warren County. So I understand all too well that comes with the job, Roger. That's comes part and parcel with it. So,
And like we said, you're on the back end of the average. So
Yeah,
you survived that average 4.5, 5 years.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of great things along the way. And I use the word "we" because it took the support of the Board of Supervisors. It took the support of county staff to make all that happen, and the support of the public. This community struggled for a long time, particularly with trying to make improvements to our public school system facilities. And I remember the Dick Trasick and Tony Carter and Archie, came in there, and they were on the board and supported this community moving forward and making those investments.
Yeah, I go back far enough myself to remember when there was a lot more tension between the school administration and school board and the supervisors than there ended up being.
And I think, so I came on in 2000 as county administrator, and Pam came on as superintendent the same year, a little later. And we sat down and we made a commitment together that, we needed to work together to accomplish our goals. Sometimes that means that, the schools were going to be our top priority. Other times they had to realize that there may be other needs, whether it's a public safety building or a regional jail, that have to take precedent. And I think it was all about trying to have that understanding. I remember former Sheriff McKeithron. I'd sat down with Danny, and Danny wanted a new public safety building, and I said, "Okay, Danny, but we got to do these 2 school projects first." And Danny had kids in school, and he realized, he understood that, and so we pushed off the public safety building. We knew we couldn't pay for it all at once,
Right.
and it was about kind of shuffling the deck, shuffling the priorities. But it got done, and it got done with the support of the board.
One thing I wanted to mention, a specific sort of outside of what we've been talking about, is, and this relates to the Carter Agreement, the double taxation of town citizens was always a big issue with the town people. As community-wide services, that they were paying taxes as a county citizen and a town citizen. A lot of that seems to have been involved in the county taking over full operational funding of different things over the years. Was that part of the quarter thing, or just something that grew out around it?
It's all intertwined, I think. One, I think, the town for many years was more progressive than the county. Up until about 1980, you had more residents that lived in town than out in the county. A lot of the county housing and stuff were second homes and people that weren't interested whether you had a Parks or Rec system.
Right.
That started to change in earnest in the 90s. And so, if you're on the town and you're operating a Parks department and half or more of your kids are coming from outside the town, you might start thinking, hey, maybe the county should start paying a larger share of the cost of that. And that first agreement back in the 90s, they had us taking over funding the Parks Department, had us taking over funding Company 1 Fire Department, and library funding, and I can't remember all the pieces and parts, Roger, but those are some of them
And then
there that we talked
the EDA
about. Yeah.
operational funding, which is a whole nother.
That was the
topic we
12.
could
I
go
was
into.
12, but yeah, I think so. I think and part of
But let's make one thing clear: when the county took over EDA operational funding from the town's share, that didn't really remove the town from the EDA equation. It's continued to be the Front Royal Warren County Economic
absolutely.
Development
So,
Authority.
and I think that's a misunderstanding by a lot of folks. EDA, Economic Development Authority. Their formal name is the Industrial Development Authority of the town of Front Royal and the county of Warren. It is a kind of a regional EDA, and there's more than one locality. Town and county are both parts of that EDA. You're right. Starting, I believe, in 2012, the county took over 100% funding of the local portion of operational funding, and
both communities still did their the individual debt services.
That's right. And you had at the time. So before it was 5 appointees by the Board of Supervisors, and I believe 2 by the town of Front Royal. We started appointing all 7. I think there were still a couple, like Mr. Llewellyn, town appointees who stayed on the board for another term or so.
Was Billy Biggs a town appointee or a county?
It's a good question. Originally, because Billy was on there, 30 years?
30,
Long time.
Around 30.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer to that
They
one.
may have still had representation on there beyond their appointment authority. But
But I'll say the double taxation has always, kind of been in the background. But I think certainly when we took over the Parks and Rec funding and the fire department funding and some of the other aspects, it took the sting away from some of those things. And they just became county functions, which the county taxpayer, including town taxpayers that live in the town limits, started paying for. And so I think a lot of that heartburn went away with that. And then again, because of the deal we structured, the town was able to share in some of the growth in the 345-22 corridor.
Now, just briefly perhaps, how much space, developable, industrial, commercial land does the current EDA have to work with? How much more growth? I mean, can you match what's happened
Right.
over the last 20 years, or will it just naturally level down?
First of all, you're not going to be able to match with respect to Family Dollar, Ferguson, Cisco, but you just don't have the land. The EDA right now has 2 parcels, about a 54 or so plus or minus acre parcel out in the Stevens Industrial Park that has rail access, and then a 22 acre parcel right there next to Cisco. That's the only industrial park acreage they have out there. The rest of the land that is tied up with the EDA is located at the Happy Creek Technology Park. They have 160 or so acres, and then the former Aptex Fiber site, the Royal Phoenix site.
What proportion of the acreage you just mentioned at Happy Creek is still developable versus what's already there?
I can't tell you specifically, but you probably, let me say, maybe there's 40 or so acres developed and another 150 plus that's undeveloped. I think here's the difference though, Roger. When you look at what's been done in the corridor, that's located off Norfolk Southern rail lines, but it's also on a four-lane divided highway. You got the inland port out there. The access is different. You look at the Happy Creek and the Royal Phoenix sites, you're not going to put that kind of truck traffic on those sites. So it's a different type of economic development you're going to be looking at, I think, moving forward.
You've had some opportunity to be around what is essentially a almost totally new EDA board of directors and their new staff, Executive Director Doug Parsons and the Administrative Assistant Gretchen Henderson. What's your impression of that board now? Because they are sort of in an awkward position coming off of the financial scandal and then trying to maintain a focus on traditional EDA activities that we're talking about.
I got to commend Ed Daly and the rest of the
Ed, who's having to resign from the board to replace you on an interim basis.
Ed and Jeff and the rest of the board members who really rolled their sleeves up and dug into the issues and are trying to. I like it. They're one by one trying to. They sold the 404 Fairgrounds property. They were able to sell the 2 properties for the Stokes Mart. They've worked out a deal to get the Afton Inn mess moving forward and renovated. That's
And I think that
it's a big
there's a
eyesore
lot of
sitting on the corner.
misunderstanding. I think the Afton Inn thing got held up partially by the financial scandal because it was alleged that some money was moved through the Afton Inn, not by the developer,
Correct.
but that it legally held it up for a while, and then I guess it got even more complicated when the town decided to litigate against the EDA. But it seems to be they're still talking about that development group.
I think they've got a deal to start that project moving forward, and it'll be that's the entrance to Main Street,
Right,
off
right.
Royal Avenue, and right across from the courthouse, right next to Town Hall. So it's going to be a much improved visually on Main Street. So I commend the board for digging in. Of course, Greg's been involved in the asset committee trying to work through those pieces, work through the civil litigation. And Doug Parsons, I've had the opportunity to work with Doug. Of course, Doug came, he had worked with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership most recently. And I've seen him talking with prospects.
Which is a really good background to bring locally because he has
He has
vision of things going on
He
all
does,
around
and
the
he has a
state.
lot of contacts back with the state. So I think he's has those connections, and it'll allow him to help bring and recruit folks. And I think the reality is it takes time for those things to pay off. Certainly, the climate, the environment hasn't been the best to sell the community, but hopefully that's getting better.
Right.
And with the support of the new board and the EDA board, hopefully he'll be successful in the next year or two.
Now, we talked at some length about your tenure here, and I guess the fact you were here so long, in some people's minds, brings you more under the scrutiny of, well, how did he let this happen? Because he's been here so long, he must know everything that's going on in this community. Do you, in fact, know everything that goes on in this community? And maybe segue from that into exactly what is your role as far as the EDA goes as county
Well,
administrator?
first of all, yeah. Obviously, if you're here, you know a lot what's going on in the community. But I also think there's something about 8 departments that report to the county administrator, plus the sanitary districts, the airport. And since its inception, I've sat as the chair of the RSW Regional Jail. So I just stepped down from that here at the end of July as well. So those are the things that take my focus and attention. Those are what I get, graded on for my job performance. From the standpoint of the EDA, you were there most month. I come in and give a report on what's going on at the county. I do the same type of report for the chamber as well, to let them know, the chamber members, to let them know what's going on.
Essentially, county would give a report,
Town would
and
give a
the town
report.
would give a report. So
And we usually left after that point. So
Yeah.
unless there was a if there was a county project, sometimes they would ask me to stay in closed session, but usually not privy to that. Over the years, certainly there were projects that were run through the EDA. I'll give you a great example, Ball Drive. You've been out there on Ball Drive, which interconnects Interbake and Cisco and Torrey. Those were construction projects that were run through the EDA. And Leitron Parkway, that was a town project that the town asked the EDA to spearhead, and by getting the EDA involved, it involved the county because we paid 2/3 of the
was
cost.
locating the hospital there crucial to Leach's Run?
Well,
development
I would say
across there?
I would say this: you wouldn't have a hospital there if it wasn't for the road.
Right.
It was important for the county, obviously, because of the new Warren County Middle School, and part of the property acquired for Leach Run ultimately became part of the middle school site. We had to acquire some additional property as well, but certainly there's a benefit to the entire community for construction of that road, and in particular the middle school and what will be the new hospital opening next year, I think, as well.
I don't know, because it seemed to be indicated during the separation special meeting that they wanted to maintain somewhat good relations even though you were leaving, because you may be a key witness in future EDA civil litigation hearings. I know, so you probably legally can't talk about some parts of that, but just more in a general way, what can we learn from what happened, how it slipped through the cracks? I mean, the EDA board, like we were talking about tenures, sometimes it seemed like almost a U.S. Supreme Court lifetime appointment. You know, you didn't resign from the EDA board, you died.
Well, let me just say this. I think it was almost a perfect storm in that you ended up with both Patty Wines, long-time chairman of the EDA board, and Jim Meestum, who I believe then was either vice or treasurer, one of the two.
I think he might have been treasurer.
They both were battling cancer, and of course Billy had his health issues as well. So of the 7-member board, you had 3 fairly long-term members that were battling significant health issues around the same time. I don't know how much that played into it, but it certainly couldn't have helped the situation. But as I mentioned earlier, the EDA is a separate legal authority. They're a separate unit of government. Since 2012, the 7 members are appointed by the Board of Supervisors. And that's where the county direct involvement stopped. They in turn hired the executive director, and that director reports to the EDA board, not to the county administrator, not to the Board of Supervisors. I will say that over the last year, the EDA board in working with us, they put some procedures in place that I think will go a long way to ensuring that something like that can never happen again. Number one, first and foremost, was on July 1, 2019, the county became the fiscal agent for the EDA. So from then forward, when the EDA has a bill, that bill is coded and signed off on by 2 members of the EDA board. It comes over to the county, goes through the finance department process just like any other county bill. It's reviewed by the finance director, has to be approved by the Board of Supervisors, and ultimately, of course, the treasurer is in charge of cutting the final check. So there's multiple layers of review in that process. The other thing,
I guess the process that existed previously without all that oversight had been there for decades. I mean, when
probably
the
since
EDA
1969 when the EDA was formed,
late
would be my
60s,
guess.
yeah.
The other 2 things, one, I think with the modified bylaws, I believe there's a 2-term limit for board members, but there's also there are limits on terms of office for the EDA, like the chair and vice chair. So it'll
Which can be a good or bad thing. We seem to have a good board in place now. You don't want to cut them all out real quick.
But what it does is it encourages rotation, and that the same folks don't stay in the same office.
Right.
You won't see a Billy Biggs serving as treasurer for 30 years under that scenario. So, I think those practices, and this year we talked about, it did not go through, we talked about the potential for the EDA becoming a county department. Again, maybe because it was jointly created and funded and by the town and county, probably the reason it was never placed from a fiscal agent standpoint under the town and county is the desire, like the town folks didn't want it under the county, and the county folks didn't want it under the town, so they stayed their own entity.
Right.
And but I think everybody realized that it made sense for that additional oversight to be in place to just to make sure that things are being reviewed and evaluated, overseen as they go through the process, especially the approval of checks and payments.
Now, the civil litigations, the EDA's civil litigation against, I think, what's up to around 25, 26 defendants now, started out at $21.3 million. Now it gets up around 25, 26, 27 now with the second group, something like that.
Okay.
I think it was 4.45 million added to the 21.3. But a lot of people seem to think that money is just gone. But I think there are properties frozen that may be seized.
Well, first of all,
do you have an idea of what percentage of what's alleged to have been missing or misdirected could be recovered still?
Well, I don't, but a couple things to remember. One, $10 million was a loan Mr. Tran is currently, as far as I understand, current on his loan payments. Secondly,
which leads me to the question that you may not be in a position to answer. Why would the EDA Board of Directors agree to give a $10 million loan to somebody and say you only have to spend $2 million of it here?
Yeah, and of course that loan was given by the town first. I
Well, speaking of that, the town tries to minimize its involvement, but my understanding from at the time, the way Jennifer McDonald, as the administrator of the EDA, executive director, presented it to the town, the bank did not want to give that loan. They wanted a sign from the community that the community was supporting that project, the IT federal project, and the town gave what was supposed to be a 1-month, $10 million bridge loan, which was extended for 2 more months before the bank agreed to do the loan and take it over when the town got their money back.
And unfortunately, like the Stokes Mart and the Afton Inn and the Kurt Tran loan, the county was not involved, did not discuss any of those. That we were not even part of the conversation.
Because those were more in-town
projects. Yeah, and
in fact, didn't a higher percentage of the EDA's current property and projects in town than out?
Absolutely. Again, because I've mentioned the you're talking about maybe 75 or so acres out in the county. You've got over 300 between the Happy Creek and the Royal Phoenix site. So right. Yeah, majority of the projects were in town. Majority of the property they have and are still in the process of marketing is located within town limits. It's all in the county, just under town jurisdiction.
One thing that's sort of a matter of, or an issue for a lot of people regarding the EDA was the fact that the Cherry Beckert financial investigation, forensic audit, whatever you want to call it, was stopped before it was completed. Can you explain the thought process with the board?
Well, I think ultimately you get to a point where you can press pause on it when you get to a point where, Roger, I think you've identified enough missing assets and what you can go after. Do you spend another 100 to go after 10 with Cherry Beckert, or do you use
$10 or $10 million?
$10. Or do you use a Carolyn Stimmel? So Carolyn has been working since even before when Cherry Beckert was here, but
so it wasn't like a vacuum was created by that when we brought Carolyn in. And
Carolyn was in when Cherry Beckert was there.
The other person working with her over there with the EDA, Heather Tweedy, I think.
Yes, yes.
So they sort of took on some of that role.
Took on some of that role and continued some of that review as well.
And as I believe it was a social media post that the reason Cherry Beckert got that financial investigation was that she was an old girlfriend of yours that you dated in college.
They're one of the largest accounting firms in the country.
Cherry Beckert is not a person, right?
Cherry Beckert is not a person. No.
Well, Doug, I guess maybe I should ask you before you leave, are you in the middle of a job hunt now, or do you decide to step back and take a breath?
Try to take a breath.
Immediate plans?
I've told a couple folks, I said, I'm 51. Feel like I've got another 10 or 15 years left in the tank. I'd like to find another community where I can make a difference like I feel I have in Front Royal Warren County. And, this is, I've spent half my life here. And
where are you from originally?
Tidewater. So about 3 hours away. So, it was, I found this looking for an ad when I was looking for a job in the Richmond Times-Dispatch. I think I had interviews here and in Fauquier at the same time. And I remember talking to a former mentor, and I said, what's the difference? He said, you go to Warren, you'll get a lot more opportunities to do different things and grow professionally. And they were right. I certainly was given a lot of opportunities, even early in my career. Late 90s, I was heading the courthouse construction project and the government center projects, and it really exposed me to a lot of different things other than planning. And it was because we're a small community and you didn't have as many staff resources.
I can sort of relate to that because I came here in the mid-'80s as part owner of a restaurant, which lasted for about 2 years. And I was on my way back to Richmond, where I'd come from, where I went to college. And I answered an ad in the paper for a sports stringer for a local weekly paper. And a year and a half later, I was editor of the paper, having never taken a journalism course in my life. That's the kind of thing that can only happen in a small town.
That's right. So, yeah, I think those opportunities come up and you take advantage of them. And like I said, at the end of the day, all of us want to make a difference, and I feel like I've been able to do that here. And whether it's school capital improvements, I was looking. The reality is most of the infrastructure of this town was built and constructed in the late 30s, early 40s. When you look around, that's when APTEX came in. A lot of money got pumped in, WPA money to build the high school. The 2 bridges were built. The courthouse was built. Town hall was built. And a lot of that stuff had started to wear out. I'm talking about 20 years ago, and we've replaced the North Fork and the South Fork bridges. We've replaced the Goonie Creek Bridge, the 2 low water bridges at the same time, the overall bridge. We've been able to replace most of our schools, and we're renovating, of course, AS roads this year. Down the road will probably be LFK, but we've been able to make significant investment in improving the infrastructure of the community. And not only doing it, but having where our tax rate's about the 3rd lowest of our surrounding jurisdictions, and the fact that keep taxes low is because we've been able to recruit the economic development, and certainly the Dominion Power Plant was a big part of that as well. So it's been the previous boards have been supportive of the capital improvements in the community and seen our community move forward.
So would you say that what's alleged to have happened over the last 5 years or so at the EDA is more of a hiccup than a sign of a pattern of innate criminality in this community?
Well, I really think the EDA did a fantastic job for a long time, and I think with the leadership that they've got over there now, they're going to get back on course and start selling this community as a place to be, and are going to be able to recruit new jobs.
Are we going to be able to get all of the involved municipalities to get on the same page so that we don't scare them off?
I hope so. Because we were most successful as a community when the town and county were working together. I'd mentioned, I think it was about 11 different town managers, both interim and full permanent, that I've worked with. But even if there was issues between the council and the board, staff was always able to work together and meetings and get things done. And sometimes the town might call and ask to borrow a piece of equipment, or we might call them. They were always there for us, and we've always tried to be there for them. It's a very symbiotic relationship. What's good for the town is good for the county, and vice versa.
Well, you're not a county official anymore, so can you comment on your opinion of the counterproductivity or productivity of the town taking the legal stance it's taken? Because that really hurts. That hurts the EDA and the county.
Hopefully,
and town citizens at most, who are paying for the lawyers on both sides.
Hopefully, at the end
talk about double taxation.
Hopefully, at the end of the day, everybody will be able to come to the table to work for the mutual benefit of all of our citizens.
And speaking of mutual benefit, maybe we should do the last part of the interview like this. Do you want to do any? Can you hear me, Mark? Any comment on the fact that the end of your tenure came during this period of the COVID and all the having to shut the offices down and have meetings virtually?
I'll say this: I'm extremely impressed by the ability of our staff to continue to do their jobs and perform their functions throughout this pandemic. We're still getting things done on a daily basis. And we've had a few hiccups, but I can tell you this: there wasn't a single person at the county who came down in our building with COVID-19 during that tenure. So, I mean, we were able to do the precautions and put up the barriers, encourage the mask wearing, and do the things necessary to encourage the social distancing and still get the job done. And that's a difficult thing right now. It's the virus is real. I think y'all had Michael Williams on here recently. Michael got sick. I've talked to a number of folks in the community who have dealt with it. Some with obviously different symptoms, more severe symptoms than others.
And we have been pretty lucky out here in the valley with the lower numbers.
We have been, and we're not through it yet.
Knock on wood.
Knock on wood, not through it yet. And of course, we had our bout at the RSW Regional Jail. And some of our other congregate care facilities in the community have been through it. But, I think that we'll get through it. The country will get through it. hopefully we get through it together and come out stronger on the other end.
And I think a huge part of this coming through it successfully is reflected in the school board and the school administration's plans for reopening. They seem to be taking a very careful, which is, a lot of it is directed from the federal or state level, but still the way they're staggering it and combining the virtual versus the in-school.
Yeah, and I think, it's a tough decision. I'm glad I don't have to make it, but I think it is important. I've got 2 kids. I think it's important for kids to be in the classroom somewhat, if they can, for their education. And
But to understand the importance for the social
Yeah.
distance, which is tough for kids, especially the younger ones.
You just had a school system last week, I think, that opened in Georgia and had all these
Yeah, I
pictures
saw
of
the
masks,
video of it, and they were all just,
and they had what?
and then they
8
suspended
sick?
the kid that took the video.
They had 8 kids that came down with the virus.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't be
So,
surprised, but yeah, you have to be aware.
Well, thank you, Roger. I
Well,
appreciate.
we're not supposed to shake
Oh.
hands now. Thank you for being here, Doug, and good luck in the future, and good luck to us all.
Thank you, Roger.
Should we
Good
get
luck.
masked?
Now you want me to go masked up?
Okay, I guess that's a wrap, people. Mark?